This is the end of an era. This is the downing, the collapse of our nation. And I'm not going to be able to save it. Donald Trump isn't going to be able to save it. And conservatives would love to think that a savior is going to change this. But I tell you, the deep state is too strong. And you've got to know your conspiratorial history to know how deep and how powerful and how evil the deep state is. And it's the enforcement arm of the larger globalist conspiracy. So no matter if Donald Trump has good intentions, he doesn't have the capability because he doesn't know conspiracy. He didn't know that James Comey was deep state. He didn't know that Robert Mueller was deep state until he betrayed him. He didn't know that Christopher Wray, who he replaced Comey with, was deep state. How did I know? Because all three of those were involved in the cover-up for 9/11.
President Nelson was a member of Skull and Bones. Is everybody that was a member of Skull and Bones evil? Well, I don't think President Nelson is evil.
No, he is not. And Brother Ashton was a member while he was at the University of Utah, and one other member, I forgot his name now, a general authority, was a member of Skull and Bones. Well, let me tell you, Skull and Bones is a very evil, satanic fraternity from Yale University, where they have a secret crypt initiation ceremony where a homosexual act is required.
Right.
Now, that's a complete dichotomy with President Nelson.
Welcome back once again, Joel SKOUSEN, to the program. How are you? Every time you come on, you look younger and younger. I think you're a Benjamin Buttons case, right? You're going in the opposite. Have you ever seen that movie with Brad Pitt? I'm not saying Brad Pitt's the greatest guy in the world, but it's a good movie where
I try to live healthy, and I work hard every day, and I work out every day, and do my running and exercising and eat right. So that's the secret to a long life.
That's right. And we are going to get into that. Of course, my grandparents always talked about castor oil. Their parents giving them castor oil for everything. But
open your mouth. Open. Stop it.
Okay, so the World Affairs Brief, that is your weekly news analysis service that people can get for how much again, Joel?
It's $48 a year, or $5 a month, or $88 for 2 years. And as I say, that's people are used to getting things free on the internet, but that's how I make my livelihood. And I think people are worthy of their hire if you've got a unique point of view that I do.
That's right. You have to make a living today. Well, you've always had to make a living, but even more so now we are going financially underwater, which is why in a second, I'm going to let the folks know what you're up to. But the World Affairs Brief is weekly. It is a service that provides commentary and insights on global issues. It is published by none other than Joel SKOUSEN and aims to offer information that mainstream media and governments may omit, and they do, with a focus on what Joel perceives as a globalist conspiracy. And he is always encouraging us to learn about conspiracy because it is true. There are untrue conspiracies, but there also are true conspiracies. Okay. Welcome back. Joel, you sent me an email, and I didn't know this. I think maybe you mentioned it in your World Affairs Brief that you are running for President of the United States of America. What have you, has this been in the works for a while, or is this just something recently in the last year that you decided that you were going to do?
Well, actually, it isn't something that I decided to do, but I got a call from the Constitution Party, which is probably the most ideologically correct party in the United States, calling for a restoration of the values of the Constitution according to the founders who wrote it, asking me if I would be a candidate for president. And I have been decided to pursue that. It won't be official until April 25th. The nominating convention is in Salt Lake City this year, and I will be giving a major address there, the keynote address to the Constitution Party. And it was after agreeing to that keynote address that the party chairman in Pennsylvania called me and asked me, well, listen, you'd make a good presidential candidate, so would you consider running? And I said I would. Um, and even though I have been pessimistic and still am about the ability to turn around the country politically for a variety of reasons, still, I have a unique message that needs to be said. I have the complete conspiratorial history about what's going on in the United States, why they control both political parties, including the Republican Party at the very top, not the members themselves mostly, but and I know what's going on in foreign policy. I know the conspiratorial history behind the globalists creating Russia and China as communist countries in order to create enemies that they can then talk us someday into a global, joining a militarized global government. You have to know these conspiratorial historical facts, not theory, facts, in order to be able to interpret what's going on in the Ukraine war and why the globalists who were building these enemies suddenly turned again and started to attack and fight against Russia. Uh, and why there are three major predator centers in the world. So I have a lot to offer the American people, and I'm hoping to be able to use my candidacy for the presidency to educate a lot of conservatives who have bought into the disinformation that Putin fed to Tucker Carlson in his interview about Russia being the innocent party and how they are simply the victim of Western aggression. There are three predator centers: our own globalists, Russia, and China, and they're all controlled by Satan. And I have the knowledge and the power to be able to educate people to wake them up because we have very few years before we're going to be facing a third world war with Russia and China, and the whole world is going to change after that point. There won't be any chance for political reform after that time. So we have a small window of opportunity to wake people up on these very crucial issues um, so that they can, when the Lord preserves a remnant, which he always does when there's war, when he preserves a remnant, they'll be knowledgeable on how to do it and reestablish their political strength correctly without joining in the global government and without taking the mark of the beast and other things that have come along with that. So it's essential that people wake up. And I know most of your audience are members of the LDS Church. And, it used to be a very conservative church, but now it's a woke church. And although there are still a minority of members that are very, very strong conservatives, remembering the tradition of Ezra Taft Benson and David O. McKay and W. Cleon Skousen, those are never mentioned anymore in the church. We're in a woke church that is playing very dangerously close to excessive tolerance with gays, lesbians, and woke politics, saying that you can find Christian principles in any political party, which is simply not true. I mean, there are evil political parties and movements out there. We've got to recognize that and wake up to that. And most of my influence, you see, is behind the paywall of World Affairs Briefs. There's a subscription cost, and so it limits my access to people. Although I do national interviews all the time, by going public with a presidential campaign, I'm hoping to have a lot greater influence with conservatives and help them to wake up to the realities of life.
Well, you're the same age as Donald Trump, same exact age, and he's running for president. You're 1 year
Right.
older. Okay. Well, the reason I'm pointing that out is it's not like you are too old to run. You're actually, how old was Ronald Reagan in his second term?
I don't recall.
I believe he was in his 60s when he ran the first term, but
That's right.
So yeah, are you afraid of any pushback by the deep state?
Yes, to a certain extent, I am, because you see, the one thing the deep state fears, the one thing that the mainstream media fears, is someone who has the facts and the correct theory. And I might explain that we know many facts about conspiracy, whether it's the JFK assassination or the Martin Luther King assassination or downing of TWA 800 or the Oklahoma City bombing or the Vince Foster murder or the phony fall of the Soviet Union or the um, uh, or 9/11, which was a deep state operation from beginning. I have the facts. But because so much of it is still kept secret under the guise of national security, you have to theorize between the facts and the results. And you can correctly theorize if you're careful. Now, there's a lot of bogus theories about JFK assassination and about 9/11 and other things. And I've taken great pains to try to clarify what are the true facts in those things, which are found open to everybody on my website. On the right-hand side, there's a list of major conspiracies of government that you can read my unraveling of those things. But it's so essential. I mean, here we have the only church on the face of the earth where you have prophets of God in the Americas who, and every one of our civilizations, the downfall, whether it was before the city of Noah, the Tower of Babel, the downfall of the civilization, the Book of Mormon civilization in America, and our own, it's because of secret combinations. And the big thing that they fear is someone who knows this facts about secret combination and is effective in speaking and can expose those facts. And so they're going to come out and attack me as a conspiracy theorist. Now, I have a Wikipedia page even that, written not by myself. They always take pot shots when the deep state, which controls Wikipedia, talks about you, but they say, he's a conspiracist. Even the Southern Poverty Law Conference came after me one year to label me one of the extremists. They were making a list of extremists in the conspiracy movement. And I felt prompted to go ahead and talk to the person rather than let them, attack me without a response. And I did, and I explained the facts that I had about the JFK assassination, the 9/11 being a government operation and other things. And I talked to him about the things that I thought were bogus, but the things that were true. And so it came out with a list, and it listed me as one of the right-wing conspiracists in the United States, but they called me the cautious conspiracist. Now, that was a backhanded compliment, that at least he was well thought out.
It almost sounds like you're in on it with them. Like you're PSYOPs conspiracy theorist. I'm joking, though. Go ahead.
No, what I'm just saying. And then they took me off the list the next year, and I've never been on since.
What is that's almost like compassionate conservatism.
Well, but what it really indicates is they fear my credibility. And that's why if they choose not to give me any publicity, not to attack me, it's because they don't want people to listen to me. They don't want the facts. And, as your listeners can find, if you go to YouTube, even though I'm censored, if you go to type in YouTube Joel SKOUSEN videos, you'll come up with a globalist. What's this got to do with Joel? It's a globalist trying to debunk any criticism of globalism. Is the number one thing you'll see when you Google my name. And then if you go down far enough, you'll find my various annual speeches before the Highland Group, which usually get thousands of people viewing them, where I give a world affairs briefing about what's really going on in the world and the facts of conspiracy. But yes, I expect to get attacked, but there's a danger in attacking me, is that if I get a response or if they point people to me, they're going to get a lot of people converted to the credibility that I put.
It's interesting because you're even you expose things even more so than Trump. I mean, even in your world affairs brief, you get in detail as far as Biden's 2021 executive order allowing illegal immigrants to vote. Is that something that you are willing to continue to expose? And also Biden's demise in the White House and how that's affected us in many different on many different fronts, economically and geopolitically. Are you willing to continue to expose that?
Well, certainly. Part of any political campaign, of course, is to expose the weaknesses of the opposition. The one thing I am not running on is a platform of success, meaning that I'm going to win the presidency. Because of the electoral college system, you have to have a majority or you get nothing in this country.
Well, let me stop just real quick. Do most candidates that run, the lower end of that, like yourself, that most of them go in knowing that they're not going to win, right?
That's right.
But it's a strategy. Go ahead, continue.
Well, the strategy is to build a movement, is to educate people into their particular point of view. For example, there are three other major, four, counting myself, the Constitution Party. There is the Green Party, which is a left-wing party. There is Cornel West, the People's Party, which he didn't get the nomination. He's got the Justice Party. He's a radical left-wing black Marxist turned socialist. And so you have Jill Stein, who's a socialist, and on the far left, you have Cornel West on the very far left, and you have Robert F. Kennedy running. Now, Robert F. Kennedy is doing quite well in not only the polls, but mostly because of name recognition. When you've got the Kennedy name, which has got instant recognition within the country, and he is savvy on conspiratorial issues in a very narrow vein. He's very, very good on the conspiracy between big pharma, control of government, vaccines, and all the damage and the dangers of falsifying vaccine approval. No one should ever take another vaccine, period. I'll say that. You got to live healthy, but you can't take vaccines because you can't trust government. And Robert F. Kennedy has proved that. And then he's also put out the book, the latest one, the COVID cover-up, or the Wuhan cover-up, which exposes, in the name of creating vaccines, they have spread over 150 bioweapons labs around the world where they're creating new bioweapons so that they can patent the vaccine. Well, why go to all the work of patenting a vaccine? If you don't create the bioweapon, you don't have to have the vaccine. Now, that's even assuming that the vaccines work, and they don't. The vaccines are bioweapons in themselves, especially the mRNA. I'll be very, very frank. And they're very, very damaging to the people. And that's why they only dose about 5% of the batches with the real vaccine. Otherwise, they'd kill everybody who took them.
Do you think that's related to eugenics?
Yes, it is related to eugenics and
Okay.
depopulation. But they have to do it carefully. They can't kill everybody all at once.
I got to be careful what I say too on here, or they'll rip this down. So we hit it real quick. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. What I'm saying about these three, and then there's the Libertarian Party as well. Now, Robert Kennedy is not savvy about the conspiracies about our own government and about the Democratic Party and about, or free market economics, about social welfare problems and what they cause and the disincentive for people to improve, all the things which damage people over time. He's been trying to get the Libertarian Party to accept him as an easy way to get ballot access, since the Libertarians have about 25 states under ballot access. Green Party, almost that many. Constitution Party only has about 12 with ballot access. They have to continue every year, get thousands of signatures to get ballot access. And it's a lot of work to do. It takes a lot of money. So that's what keeps third parties from rising and taking over the big two, Republicans and Democrats. But what I'm here to tell people is that, especially my conservative audience, is that they're going to steal this election from Donald Trump. So I'm not out. I would pull votes from Donald Trump, to be sure, but it's not going to make any difference because I'm not a spoiler. I'm simply here to say, one, they're going to steal the election from Donald Trump. And number two, even if he were to get elected, he would not be able to drain the swamp any more than he was in the first time because he doesn't know conspiratorial history. And that's the only way that you know who's deep state and who isn't.
Are you willing to pull out before the primaries, or go all the way?
No, I wouldn't be pulling out for that. In the first place, look, in red states where most of the conservatives are, Donald Trump is a slam dunk anyway. He's going to win these states. He's going to win Utah. So your vote for Donald Trump is a wasted vote for two reasons. One, he's not going to make it nationally because they're going to steal this election, just like they did in 2020. And number two, the Republican Party is controlled at the very top. So whoever they elect to replace Mitch McConnell in the Senate will be a controlled entity who will sabotage Donald Trump's work. And whoever they allow to be Speaker of the House in the Representatives will be a saboteur as well. Now, Mike Johnson, the current Speaker of the House, was a pretty good conservative before he became Speaker. Now that he's become Speaker, what does he do? He compromises with the Democrats, just like Kevin McCarthy did. Now, I don't know the backroom dealing of how you get Mike McCarthy, to change do what he's done, but he is doing it, and we're seeing it right before our very eyes. You keep spending and letting the Democrats have their, and you don't close the borders. You know, if Republicans were really on our side, they would literally say, we're not voting to open up the government until that border is shut down, period. But there are too many rhino Republicans, like John Curtis in Utah, who's a Democrat dressed in Republican clothes, lying through his teeth about having conservative values. We see these ads in Utah all the time. But he's a Democrat and he's pro-abortion, and he won't say it publicly. But Project Veritas founder interviewed his chief of staff in secret on camera and got him to admit that Curtis was hiding his real inclinations so that conservatives wouldn't know what he was really all about. So that's what we're dealing with here. You're wasting your vote by voting for someone who's incapable of draining the swamp. And
well, especially if they're stealing the election. Go ahead. I have a question after you.
And in a party that will betray you and continue. Now, you do slow things down a little bit with the problem. They get a few wins, but the overall picture, we keep drifting towards general state control and globalism and the problems that we've had for that. And we keep drifting a large part in our social and demographics in the country because of public education. And of course, you can't get elected by attacking public education as I do, because even conservatives are corrupted by the fact that those of us who don't like public schools are still forced to pay taxes. And you have these lavish palaces of public education with all these programs that conservatives love to have for their kids, and they don't realize you're violating my fundamental rights and other people's fundamental rights by forcing us to pay for a type of education which we vehemently disagree with. You see, all education has values, and values should never be controlled by government and never be controlled by majority rule. The majority rule should never determine values any more than they should determine what religion you should be in. Do you let the majority decide whether or not you're going to be a Mormon or not, or a Catholic, or a Protestant? No, because values must be competing. So no one ought to have the power of the purse to fund their public schools. All schools ought to be user fee based. You can have public schools like any cooperative, but you've got to fund it by the people who want to go to those schools. You can't force other people. Now they'll say, the teachers will, well, this is a benefit for all society to have an educated society. Well, you know, that may have been true a century ago when you weren't teaching adverse values in public schools. You weren't indoctrinating. You were teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic and the basics. But now that you've got into socialism, Marxism, and you omit constitutionalism, you don't teach people conservative values. You don't teach people the limitations on government. And you teach now diversity and inclusion and equity, that is, everyone is equal. But you see, these things are creating more problems within our youth, so that our youth is uniformly now coming out of schools and universities as Democrats, as socialists, or Marxists, worse, gays and transgenders, and it's all paid for by the public purse, and it should not be. We should not have to be contributing to the indoctrination of people. All education have value. Now, I don't care what you say about he's against public education. I'm against public education that has its finger on the tax dollar. You can have all the public education you want as long as everybody who uses it pays for it. And I'll tell you, that solves the problem of prayer in school, doesn't it? You simply take your dollars to where they pray in school. It solves the question about evolution in teaching school versus creationism. You don't like the public schools pummeling your children with evolutionary errors and thoughts, then get them out of there. Don't pay for that. You don't want the universities, paying for University of Virginia is now paying almost $600,000 a year to the head of diversity, inclusion, and equity. $600,000. The university president doesn't even make that much money. So that's what we're dealing with. This is the end of an era. This is the downing, the collapse of our nation. And I'm not going to be able to save it. Donald Trump isn't going to be able to save it. And conservatives would love to think that a savior is going to change this. But I tell you, the deep state is too strong. And you've got to know your conspiratorial history to know how deep and how powerful and how evil the deep state is. And it's the enforcement arm of the larger globalist conspiracy. So no matter if Donald Trump has good intentions, he doesn't have the capability because he doesn't know conspiracy. He didn't know that James Comey was deep state. He didn't know that Robert Mueller was deep state until he betrayed him. He didn't know that Christopher Wray, who he replaced Comey with, was deep state. How did I know? Because all three of those were involved in the cover-up for 9/11 and stopping the information from getting the public about government involvement.
Or knowing how big like entities like Vanguard and what is the other one? State Street and BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Are those the entities controlling all of this?
No, they are not. This is the left-wing point of view that is often promulgated, that it is the evil corporations that are controlling our government. It's not. The real controllers of our government are always kept secret. Even though the Kissingers and the George Soros and the Zbigniew Brzezinskis and the Henry Kissinger, all of those people, Rockefeller, are out front. Those are not the top controllers. They always stay behind the scenes. They're the best kept secret in the world.
Okay, so you're saying the left wants us to think that bureaucracy is controlling this?
No. They want you to think that it's all
the big
about
banks.
Yeah, it's the big banks. It's money.
Because I always hear that from some conspiracy theorists that say that.
Who don't see the bigger picture. You see, the point is these people that control, it's not about money or or capitalism or crony capitalism. Yes, it's all true. There is crony capitalism. That's capitalism getting in bed with government to get special perks.
But who is utilizing that? Right.
So the deep state uses that to corrupt people. They lure them in with government contracts. You've got to play the game. You've got to be DEI if you're going to get this particular contract. And so they comply. You know, people who are CEOs of corporations are always mainstream people. You don't ever find anyone who's the head of a major corporation who's got a real ideological bent. You used to have someone like Chick-fil-A, until they got crucified by the media and boycotted because of their strict conservative stand and not open, or Christian stand and not opening on Sunday, etc. And then they started compromising, and then they get replaced by someone who won't hurt their stock prices. And so that's why we have all of the major, especially airlines, terrible CEOs of airlines pushing vaccines and pushing diversity and equity and other things. Now, you may say equity is, how can that be evil? Well, it is evil when you understand that people are never going to be equal. Equity means we declare, that's a socialist thought, we declare everyone equal even though they're not equal, which means that you get penalized if you have high true worth, because someone of low true worth is going to get your position just because he's a minority or because he's poor, you see. So equity is an evil when you do not accept the fact that no one is equal and never will be equal in this sort of graph. The only equality we want is equality before the law. And this whole thing runs over into religion. The reason that Mormons become so attracted, for example, and Christians in general, to the democratic call is because they believe that we have to be compassionate to the poor, that we have to be giving and all conditionally loving. And these are false doctrines that are promulgated within the Christian church as well as in Mormonism. That God loves all his children equally and esteems them all equally. He does not esteem everyone equally. He judges everyone according to the same standard. And that's what it means by he is no respecter of persons. Not that he doesn't respect anyone, but that he judges them all by the same standard and cannot be arbitrary, cannot play favorites. That's what that means.
Right. Well, I was thinking about this the other day. I have children. I have 5 kids, and I don't love them all equally. Some do things that make me happier than others. Do I love that child that is creating me the most pain and sorrow? Yes, but I do not esteem them the same way that I do the child that is doing righteous things with his life.
Well, see, and that's the problem, that we only have one verb for love in the English language, and it always implies acceptance. You see, love implies approval. It's a positive word. And that's why one has to understand, as I think I've explained before to your audience, there's two aspects to God's love. He, being perfect, can only love in a positive, approving sense of that which is good and true. Now, think about that. He can only love that which is good and true. If he were to love something that was not good and true, he would cease to be God. We would not respect him, and he would not get the allegiance of all the intelligences in the universe. Fact. But he does have, out of his love for truth, the outstretched arm, calling to people who don't match up to promptings to change, guilt feelings to make them feel unacceptable in their. And what's the opposite of that? Unconditional love. That idea that he's got accepting and approval of you no matter what you do, which is a satanic concept because it makes you complacent. It makes you feel like I'm okay where I am, just like that gay woman at BYU getting up before the General Relief Society president says, God accepts me as I am. I am perfect.
You like to mention that one a lot.
But that there is no greater example of horrible doctrine where Sharon Eubank nodded her head in approval. And someday she's going to be woefully embarrassed about nodding her head in approval of that.
I agree.
But I tell you, I get emails from people who listen to your podcast who chastise me about God's love is unconditional. They hear that so often in church. They don't realize it's a soft thinking mistake. And even general authorities make soft thinking mistakes like that. I mean, I responded to one of these ladies who wrote me from your podcast. And I said, well, listen, you probably don't remember in 2014 when Apostle Russell Nelson gave a whole speech in conference about
God's love is not
a true doctrine. And Elder Christofferson gave a speech 3 years ago to the same thing. Now, it's unfortunate they both ended those speeches by saying, but don't worry, God loves you. And they said that without conditions. And so it undoes all the good you did when you just taught people that it wasn't a true doctrine.
Okay, good.
But this is important about politics because Mormons have become generally a soft-thinking people. And they succumb to the kind of generic patriotic things. I mean, even John Curtis here in Utah gets up, and what does he promote? He doesn't promote his real beliefs. He promotes, I'm a true conservative. These are the things that I stopped. I worked with President Trump. This guy isn't in favor of President Trump. This guy's lying through his teeth. But you see, when you only see things through rose-colored glasses, when you don't think critically, when you're taught that to judge is evil, that to judge negatively is evil, you have to judge positively. You're being taught to be a non-thinker. And that's the problem in the church today. We've got a non-thinking populace generally. Now, there are exceptions. But as a person who deals in the details of life and conspiracies, I know that we're a non-thinking people.
Yeah, definitely. I've got to, going back just real quick, because I want to end this on the election thing of your candidacy for the presidency. So what I'm getting from you is that you've always expressed on the program here that the Constitution is dead, that we no longer have it. With that being said, I think what you're saying is you running for president, the swamp is they're going to use every tactic. And like you said, Trump didn't see that his first term, the beginning of his first term, when he gave that speech about the deep state. I think it was during his inauguration. I'm not sure, but he gave a pretty big speech about it. But even then, he didn't quite know what he was stepping into. Now that he does, he knows that the swamp will use every tactic that they know possible. They do not relent when it comes to getting what they want. And they're going to cheat again. And they want to steal the votes. They're going to not stop until they get the results that they want. So you knowing that the Constitution is dead and you running for president, am I right when I glean from this that you are wanting more or less to educate people on what's going on and to buckle their seatbelts, or Or is this also something that is maybe you want Congress? Is there any hope in Congress?
Or what is your, so you're, okay, I'm rambling now, but your main agenda, I'm smart, I just ramble. Your main agenda
Is to educate the people, right?
Well, specifically not on the issues, because you see, the Republican Party copies almost the same issues. They tell you what you want to hear. The Republican Party platform is pretty good. They just never implement any of it. Okay. That's the issue I want to educate people. Stop putting your faith in a savior. Stop putting your faith in a party that's going to save you.
And a
Because you see,
populist.
and a populist, because you see, we don't have a majority. Only half of the people vote, and they're not on our side. And of the half that do vote, a third are Democrats, a third are independents, and a third are Republicans.
Right.
And of the Republicans, only about 20% are really good conservatives. So we're 20% of 50%. What does that tell you? Pretty bleak.
Right.
Now, as for Trump, you imply by your remarks that now he sees because he's been betrayed by the deep state. Yes, he sees after the fact. He sees when someone betrayed, but he has no capability, zero capability of determining who's deep state and who isn't, that he lets into his administration because he doesn't know his conspiratorial history. If you don't know the history of the cover-ups in detail, you can't tell who's deep state and who isn't. And that's why he had Bill Barr become Attorney General after his lackluster first pick. That's why he picked Christopher Wray, because he didn't see who's deep state. And I'll tell you, he still doesn't have anybody on the staff who sees deep state. And he won't. In fact, he even came out and reinforced after the State of the Union address, and where Biden took credit for the vaccine, he said, well, that won't stand. I'm the one who brought us the life-saving vaccine. So even though he knows that his supporters booed him on stage when he supported the vaccine, he still can't admit he's wrong. And that's one of Trump's major flaws. His other major flaw is he's a terrible judge of character. He thinks Xi Jinping is wonderful. He thinks Vladimir Putin is wonderful. He thinks one telephone call and I could stop the war in Ukraine. He doesn't have a clue about what the evil agenda of China and Russia and our own global. He knows the globals have an evil agenda, but he doesn't know what it is.
Well, I think that's what his problem was with Steve Bannon, because Steve Bannon kind of understood conspiracy.
No, Steve Bannon did not, and still does not.
Well, he understands it's more than he used to.
Well, he understands a smattering of it in politically, but he doesn't know the history that I speak about how the globalists built up these two enemies. If you don't understand that, you're incapable of resisting the propaganda of why Putin claims to Tucker Carlson that I just falsified the collapse of the Soviet so that we could have peace and cooperation with, that's a lie. He did it so that he could get aid and trade to build up his weapon systems that he was losing the arms race over. And that's exactly what they've done.
Yeah.
So you've really got to know a full range of conspiracies. Not enough to know the details of the JFK assassins, not enough to even know the details of 9/11. You've got to get the bigger picture to understand why the U.S. created the war on terror, why they created ISIS and Al Qaeda. And one of those reasons was to create the image of the U.S. as the bully of the world. Think about this. The globalists themselves wanting to create the image in the world that we're the bully so that they could hand Russia and China the excuse to attack us someday. Why? Because they want this war as much as they do. That's how you get us into a global militarized government, by allowing the Russians and Chinese to do a first strike on U.S. military so that they can come out of their bunkers and talk us into joining a global government. COVID won't do that. COVID doesn't get you into a global government. In fact, everyone is resisting the WHO and their new pandemic treaty that they want to have global power to declare a war on the next pandemic X. But so what I'm saying is the conservatives need answers. I'm going to try to convince people that I have those kinds of answers, that I'm a person they can trust. I'm a moral Christian person, a family man, a homeschooler, a parent of children. I can't be blackmailed like Trump can. I don't have a history of problems that they can blackmail you. And you need that kind of leadership so that people can trust. Not that I'll ever lead the nation, because I'll tell you, this nation's already lost the blessings of God because of immorality, abortion, and our lost generations. And it just pains me no end that conservatives keep sending their children to public schools because it's more convenient. They're losing their children, even if they're getting educated in terms of the sciences and other things, and they go to universities. They're getting exposed in school to social and peer pressure and influences that are damaging to their spirituality and damaging to their sense of self-control and morality. And when a teenager walks into the home and suddenly a parent realizes, oh, they don't want to be here anymore. Their love affairs are with the world. They're outside. I have no more pull on those child. When that happens to you, you know that you've just failed as a parent because you've allowed them to get a love affair with the world by giving them cell phones, by allowing them to be on social media all day long. You've allowed them to get infected by the world and become a love affair with the world, and they're lost to you. And you don't have any more pull. You don't have any more influence. Yeah, you can clamp down and you can restrict them. They'll only hate you for it. But you see, that's what happens when you're permissive. And we have a epidemic of permissiveness in Christianity.
And we could see that in history. This isn't unprecedented, right? What I mean is we live in the last dispensation. We live in the last days. So things are unique. We've never had technology like we've ever had it before on the face of the earth. But when I say it's not unprecedented, I mean Babylon fell the same way. Sodom and Gomorrah fell the same way. Rome fell the same way. Passivity, spoiling the child, not teaching these values and principles that made us who we were. We forget the 1950s. We forget post-World War II, which I know exactly what you're saying, Joel. We are living in a day that it's a ticking time bomb. We are there's to what happens next? We get taken over. We get usurped by our enemy, right? When there's a moral collapse in a society that used to be morally up here, a Judeo-Christian society, when that is no longer a thing, what happens next?
You get conquered.
You get conquered.
I don't think we're going to get conquered per se, because I don't think even Russia or China want to invade physically or occupy a nation with billions of arms in private hands. That is a major deterrent for an occupation. But I think what happens is, because this next war will be preceded by an EMP strike that takes down the grid for up to a year, because we don't stockpile any of the long distance transformers that allows the grid to come back up. I think you have chaos, and you have pillaging, and you have murder and rape and other things. And it's going to be very difficult for society to knit back together when you have so much hatred between people for the injustices that have occurred in the name of a crisis. Not only that, you're never going to see, in my opinion, this World Economic Forum AI robotic society come into being, because it takes a constant supply of electricity and the internet to keep that stuff running, which means that the world then collapses into internecine warfare of evil fighting against evil. And that's been prophesied in the scripture, is that evil begins to fight against evil, such that, as the 45th section of the Doctrine and Covenants says, the New Jerusalem will be the only place on the face of the earth where people are not at war one with another. Now, that doesn't sound to me like they're going to be safe in Salt Lake City or safe in California, even though there are temples there, as people continue to want to believe that wherever there's a stake or Zion, those are temporary Zions. But eventually there will only be one Zion, place of safety, that you have to get to, and you have to be pure in heart to get there. And I'll tell you, it's not going to be a call out from the pulpit that gets you there. It's going to be you get driven out because you have principles, and because you take a hard stand for liberty, and you know about conspiracy, and you get persecuted because you tell the truth about the conspiratorial forces that are controlling our government, and that will control the global government that comes after us.
Yeah. Which brings me to this. Let's segue to the war. The war. There is no real the war yet, but it almost seems like you could say that the war is imminent? Is it not imminent? So you said that that Ukraine will not be the catalyst for a global conflict. Can you explain?
Well, and that's because no matter how many times Russia threatens to nuke the West over Ukraine or his red lines, et cetera, he can't nuke the West if you can't occupy in the aftermath of it. In the aftermath of Hiroshima, the West, the United States occupied Japan. If you can't occupy the United States, they simply rebuild and come after you again. And that's why Russia has to wait for China. And that's why the trigger events for World War III are going to involve China, either Taiwan or Kim Jong-un attacking South Korea, or US troops and naval forces if we try to stop China from taking Taiwan, as Kim Jong-un has threatened to do. So I think that's the major trigger event. You see, we don't have to intervene in Ukraine, but we have to intervene in South Korea. We have 26,000 troops there. We can't let them die without intervening militarily. So that guarantees that if the Far East explodes, we're going to be in World War III probably within 3 weeks. So your listeners might understand that if you need to get out of Dodge, that's the trigger event that should do that. Now, as I wrote in my book, Strategic Relocation, you ought to be thinking about relocating away from Hill Air Force Base or away from any of the number of Air Force bases in California, that are going to be nuclear.
Well, I live 3 miles away from Lemoore Naval Air Station.
Well, Lemoore
I shouldn't
is not,
say where I live, but I grew up. I can throw a rock at the Lemoore Naval Air Station. That's how close.
I've trained in A4 aircraft at Lemoore. I know it well. I can tell you it's not a big enough base probably to merit a nuclear
Okay,
attack,
good.
but a conventional attack. Still, there are many nuclear targets around in California, and in Seattle has a huge congregation of nuclear targets. There are going to be major waves of fallout depending on which way the wind blows. So people need to prepare in advance. It's not enough to say, well, I'm going to get in my car and drive out of here 3 weeks before a trigger event, or 3 weeks after a trigger event happens to avoid this. You don't want to be in a car when there's nuclear fallout. You've got to be in a safe place where you have a safe room and a shelter. And I don't use the B word, the bunker word, because you only need a bunker if you're within a blast range of a nuclear target, within a 10-mile area of a nuclear target. And why spend the money on a bunker 10 miles when you can move? So relocate, so that you don't have to spend that money on the hardening that requires the blast doors and special blast valves, et cetera.
Right.
Sure, I can design those things, but there's no need for it if you can relocate to safety before that. And someday, because the church will not be allowed to take the globalist mark of the beast, persecution will someday come upon the church. Now, right now, the world loves us. It's because we're giving in and being tolerant to all the woke agenda. But someday, the Lord's going to correct that direction, and the world will come against us. And so,
some have said that might be a strategy the Lord's using to kind of, and when you're in the way of your enemy, kind of thing. I know you just sighed and looked at me like you're an idiot, Troy.
No, what I'm saying, Troy, is that someday there's going to have to be a preliminary gathering of Mormons when the persecution begins, before the division of the church, where you get separated out those that are worthy to go to the New Jerusalem. And that's not going to be a decision made by home teachers or ministers or bishops or stake presidents or even the church. It's going to be separation by being driven out because of your known position in favor of liberty and in favor of and opposition to a global government and opposition to the conspiratorial forces of the deep state. They'll come after you and target you. But there'll be an interim gathering, in my opinion, from California and all the other places that Mormons reside. When the persecution begins, I think they're going to have to flee. And that's probably where the prophecy of Heber C. Kimball comes into play, where he saw Salt Lake City become one of the evil cities of the world. And he saw this huge influx of members coming into Salt Lake City. Didn't know why, but saw the members taking advantage of them for land prices and other things. And I think that's the preliminary gathering through persecution that comes where Mormons have to flee to majority status where they can protect themselves from discrimination by government and mobs of people. Whether or not that happens before the war or afterwards, I don't know, but it's in that cauldron of conflict and masses of people descending probably on Utah and southern Idaho that you'll find great division occurring and great conflict occurring between the righteous and the unrighteous. And eventually there'll be a separation of the wheat from the tares.
And has there always been where during war and big wars, you have this, like right now we have nationalism versus globalism here, right? And at the same time, we're battling these social, is it a strategy to do that and then to go to war? That definitely weakens us. Are you concerned about our military if we go to war? How strong do you feel that we are? Are we still pretty strong as a military?
Well, we're individually, as the nations, the strongest military in the world, and certainly the most high-tech military, but it's a pretty thin layer. In other words, it doesn't take much to use up our high-tech weapons before you're out of them. And that's one of the strategies of Iran, who's in league with Russia and China, to do to the United States.
So ground troops are still important. Go ahead.
Yeah, but even more than ground troops, high-tech weapons are very, very important. You look what in Ukraine the HIMARS missiles have, and the Taurus missiles, and the others that can reach out long range. It's very difficult. I mean, see, one of the problems with the West is that you have a consolidation of military bases in NATO Europe. And so you have probably about half a dozen major air bases of all the NATO air powers in Europe, and none of them have protected enclosures for aircraft. So it's very easy in a war for Russia to lob a nuke at every one of those bases and destroy all the aircraft on the ground, including all your high-tech weapons. Now, it's harder to target aircraft carriers out at sea. That's why they're important. But that's getting ever more closer to a possibility with, satellite and other technology that can track them. But, a missile flying 20 minutes through the air to get to there, an aircraft carrier is steaming out of the way, and that missile is going to miss. So it's very difficult to do. But still, what I'm saying is, and I might preface this by saying I just watched the Pennsylvania debate between the 8 libertarian candidates for president, all very intelligent individuals and well spoken about liberty. But to a single man, they are so anti-war that they don't see any enemies, any need to protect us, any need for any military bases, or the Pentagon. I mean, I couldn't believe that intelligent people could be so stupid militarily to think that there are no enemies out there, that only our globalist government is the enemy, only their provocations. And if we control the government as libertarians and we don't provoke, there won't be any war. That's a denial of the issue of Satan and systemic evil. See, the reason why liberals don't understand why we can't all get along is because they don't understand systemic evil, as it influences people's minds and actually has revelatory power to men who long for power and promises them power to take over the world and destroy God's work on earth. And that's very real. As God is, so is Satan and his forces. But to be totally ignorant, and most libertarians are not Christian, are not particularly religious in any way, and they simply don't have this view of evil. And so they're not preparing for that. And in addition, it's not just a matter of having ground troops. Now, our ground troops in the military are extremely weakened because of diversity, equity, and inclusion, woke policies of the Pentagon, which are terrible. Bringing in minority quotas, et cetera, lowering the standards of training, et cetera, so that you have the lowest common denominator. And the good people are getting out of the military, as they should. In fact, I think God is inspiring that, because when this nuclear first strike falls on military forces, our government is not going to protect its own. And that's a condition that Army people and Navy and Marine Corps people generally think government will protect us. Well, they're not going to protect you in this war because they want the military decapitated. That's how they get America into joining a militarized global government.
And the
So
military
beware.
industrial complex is still a thing, too.
Well, yeah, and
Right.
it always will be until it's destroyed, etc. But the military industrial complex does not drive this. The military industrial complex is lured into the process of globalism by the handing out of billions of dollars in contracts. And so you lure people in and you corrupt them and you cause them to cover up and you do secret operations and you do secret things in space, even though, and don't talk about it because of national security. And that's how you cover up the illegal acts of men under the guise of national security. And it's a real problem. But remember, the military industrial does not drive this globalist agenda. It's satanic driven. He reveals himself to certain high leaders within the globalist conspiracy, and they
Yeah.
choose coming up. And remember that most people within the conspiracy are not knowing conspirators. They're there because of the lure of power, position,
Or money.
advancement,
Yeah.
and immunity.
Well, I've
You
always
see,
said there's two types. There's the ones that are motivated by money, and they're usually or power, money and power, but they're below those who already have the money and power. The ones that already have the money and power to work directly under Satan, they're not motivated by that. They have as much as they want.
that's
Right?
exactly right.
They're the
That's why
puppet masters. They're the
that's why
puppet
left is
masters.
wrong. The left is wrong about money being the root of all evil and the motivation of globalism. It isn't. They already own the money. They already have as much. How much more wine, women, and song, and yachts and other things do you
Right.
need?
No,
See,
they're motivated by agenda only.
well,
ahead.
It is power, but more than power, or just as equal to power, is the promise of immunity for your sins. And this is not only immunity like the Clintons have from prosecution, or Biden has for prosecution. We've seen that in action. Satan at the highest level promises people, the leaders of these movements, that they'll have immunity from the chains of hell. And if you read Isaiah chapter 14, you'll see where he talks about all the great and powerful of the earth are sitting in hell, waiting for he that was going to thrash the nation to come and rescue them. And they see him descend in chains, and they say to him, "Art thou brought low like unto us?" We're shocked. You were going to save us, and now we see you descend in chains, and they realize the jig is up. Satan is not going to be able to fulfill the Faustian pact of promising them money and wealth for joining his movement. But believe me, the reason all of the great leaders of the nations are in hell waiting for Satan is because they're part of this and have made these pacts with Satan for great wealth and power. But immunity on earth and immunity in the next life is a big part of what drives this satanic conspiracy. And Satan has always had conspiratorial power from Cain and Abel on, and every generation has been had a downfall because of conspiratorial secret combinations of forces. And people need to know the history. It's not a need to know my general statements. I have the history. It would take me hours and hours to go through it, but I could give, and I'm going to be giving several speeches throughout the nation during my campaign where I'm going to explain the conspiratorial history of the deep state, which should be of great interest to people.
Why do I never have enough time with you?
Well, I come back once a month.
Do you remember that show Crossfire with
Yes.
what was his name? Is he still alive? I don't think he is he?
William F. Buckley?
Yeah. No, not William F. Buckley. William F. Buckley was let me see.
Yeah, he was the founder of National Review. He was a skull and bones conspirator that went conservative.
Oh, and he exposed them.
No, he did not.
Oh, he was still a globalist?
He covered for the conspiracy. You would never hear Buckley.
Oh, Buckley was psyops then.
Yeah.
He was a pretend conservative. He was playing the right left paradigm game, right? But I always wanted to do the end, and I'll prepare my questions next time. But remember at the end of Crossfire, where you go, and he'd say a couple of words, and they'd have to give him like a 2-minute or no, like a 5-second answer. I'm going to do that with you next time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Joel. Wait a minute. but I want to bring something for next time. I want to talk about Skull and Bones just for a brief, or maybe you have a second now. Let's make this the last thing we talk about right now, and then we'll go. President Nelson was a member of Skull and Bones. Is everybody that was a member of Skull and Bones evil? Well, I don't think President Nelson is evil.
No, he is not. And Brother Ashton was a member while he was at the University of Utah, and one other member, I forgot his name now, a general authority, was a member of Skull and Bones. Well, let me tell you, Skull and Bones is a very evil, satanic fraternity from Yale University, where they have a secret crypt initiation ceremony where a homosexual act is required.
Right.
Now, that's a complete dichotomy with President Nelson, because anyone who knows him knows this is a childlike, humble, wonderful person. Now, he may be blind to conspiracy, he may be blind to the vaccine issue, but he is not intentionally leading anyone astray. He's a wonderful person. Right. So was Brother Ashton, etc. You can't tell me that the conspirators who are going to bring Skull and Bones to the University of Utah would bring along the initiation rites that would turn good people off. They would not do so. They entered University of Utah with another fraternity called Skull and Bones.
Gotcha.
And I don't know at one point, if ever, they've completely transitioned it into the evil conspiratorial Skull and Bones like Yale. But I'll tell you this, that President Nelson to this day doesn't know the history of Skull and Bones. Otherwise, he would have been embarrassed to say in his biography and admit that he was president of Skull and Bones.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think it really mattered to, like, it was something that was a part of his history that he kind of moved on with, you know?
No, he was actually proud of the fact that he was the president of a fraternity there. Now, what I'm saying is that a good man would not have been proud of such a thing had he known that it had a major conspiratorial background.
Right. Okay.
But this is a further indication of the limited knowledge that he has, and probably the reason why the Lord chose Nelson, because he is allowing good men to serve in leadership in the church who won't see conspiracy so that they're not guilty. I mean, if you took and made an Isaiah a prophet in a modern day sense and told him, I want you to lie to the church and tell them there's no danger from conspiracy, as Hinckley believed, it would crucify Isaiah's soul if he knew it, you see, to have to tell a lie. And so you basically... Well,
that's just like saying Joseph Smith was a Mason. Not every Mason is evil.
That's right. And not every
Mason they use the fraternity to do their evil.
Well, in this case, there was a protection pact in the Masonic, and Joseph needed protection. And so this was a compact that everyone would protect him. That's why he flashed the Masonic symbol at the people who were trying to kill him at Carthage. And
did the Masonic yell out the window.
Given the Masonic sign, so and it didn't work, of course. But you see, that's the reason that he joined, not because, and he may have recognized some of the similar symbols to the temple ceremony that were revealed to Joseph. He didn't get them from the Masonic order. They're totally different. And not all Masons are evil. You have to get up to a certain higher level, way higher, before you understand the evil agenda.
Well, especially in Hollywood, it's the Scottish Rite that's pretty prominent. But anyway, that's a whole other.
Remember too that Satan moves on from things. Once things get exposed in the Illuminati, he moves on. And now you have the Committee of 300, and you have the Bilderberg. Now he's moved on. You have the Aspen Institute. And
now he has technocracy, and he has Silicon Valley, and he has
the World Economic Forum, which is probably the biggest satanic organization that there is.
Council on Foreign Relations, I would say, is still in there too.
Always been a strong person within the conspiracy against liberty.
Joel, thank you. I've got a million more questions, but we don't have time. Come back again.